You know, when you think of coral reefs, you probably picture these incredible, vibrant underwater worlds. But the truth is, they're in serious trouble. We're in a race against time to save them. But what if our first, most obvious idea is actually the wrong one? Let's get into it. Okay, to really get a grip on how big this problem is, just look at this number, 80%. That is how much coral cover we've lost in the Caribbean alone since the 1970s. Think about that for a second. It's a staggering loss. And this isn't just a Caribbean problem. We're seeing this happen on reefs all over the globe. So of course people are trying to fix this, right? We're out there, we're building these underwater nurseries, planting corals back onto the reefs. But it really makes you wonder, is what we're doing actually working? Are we bringing back a whole ecosystem, or are we just, planting these really expensive temporary underwater gardens? All right, so let's start with what seems like the most obvious fix. You see a reef that's been wiped out, and your first thought is probably, well, let's just put more coral back. It's a super intuitive idea, and it's the basis for what we call coral gardening. And the process itself sounds pretty simple, right? You basically take these little pieces of coral, you let them grow in these safe underwater nurseries till they get a bit bigger, and then you just plant them back on the damaged reef. It's almost exactly like planting trees to regrow a forest, just, underwater. And I want to be clear, this is not some small niche effort. We're talking about a massive scale. In the Caribbean alone, you've got over 150 of these coral growing operations. Every single year, tens of thousands of corals grown in nurseries are being planted back in the wild. So, with all that work going on, you'd think we'd be well on our way to solving the problem. But here's the catch. It turns out a reef is way more complicated than just a bunch of corals. And simply planting them, well, it's just not enough. Okay, this is where we need to take a step back and start thinking like an ecologist. Imagine a healthy reef as this bustling, vibrant city. It's got all these complex rules and interactions that make it work. And just adding more buildings, the corals, doesn't mean the city magically comes back to life. You need the citizens, the services, the whole system. To really get it, you've got to look at the reef's hidden operating system. It's all these little jobs that have to get done. You have fish that eat algae, basically acting like little lawnmowers, clearing space for corals to grow. You've got predators keeping other creatures in check. There's this constant battle for space, for real estate, between corals and sponges and algae. And hey, even fish waste acts as fertilizer. For a reef to be truly healthy, all these things have to be happening. And all these interactions create these really powerful things called feedback loops. Here's a good one. More coral means more homes for fish. More fish can mean more of those little lawnmower fish, which clears more space for, you guessed it, more coral. That's a positive feedback loop. It helps the reef recover. But it can go the other way too. A lack of coral means fewer fish, which means more algae takes over, leaving even less room for corals. That's a negative loop, and it can send a reef into a death spiral. So, okay, the challenge is definitely ecological. But, it's actually deeper than that. It's almost philosophical. The way we think about fixing things, the assumptions we bring to the table, those can doom a project before a single coral is even planted. Yeah, researchers have actually identified these common myths that guide a lot of restoration work, often without people even realizing it. They're basically these oversimplified ideas we try to apply to these incredibly complex ecosystems, and they can really lead us down the wrong path. So check these out. There are 5 big ones. You've got the carbon copy myth, which is trying to build an exact replica of a reef from 50 years ago. Or the cookbook approach, thinking one recipe will work everywhere. The one thing they all have in common, they treat a living, breathing, dynamic system like it's just a simple engineering problem to be solved. But let's zero in on that field of dreams myth for a second. If you build it, they will come. This is really the heart of that just plant more coral idea. It's this belief that if we just put the physical structure back, the corals, then all the right fish and crabs and everything else will just magically show up to do their jobs. But what if they don't? What if they're not around anymore? Then all you've built is a beautiful but totally empty city. Okay, so when you add up all this ecological complexity, our own flawed ways of thinking, and the giant shadow of climate change looming over everything, well, a really serious debate has kicked off in the scientific community. And the question is pretty blunt. Is all this effort, all this money, even worth it? And, the critics, they have a point. They look at the small scale of these restoration projects and then at the massive global scale of the climate crisis, and they can't help but ask, aren't we just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic here? This quote really hits the nail on the head. Some scientists are arguing that every single dollar we spend trying to plant coral is a dollar we're not spending to fight the actual root cause, climate change. Their big worry is that it gives us this false sense of security, this idea that, oh, it's fine, we can just fix the reefs later. But this is where the debate gets really interesting. The folks who support restoration say the critics are mixing up two totally different things. On one hand, you have restoration ecology. That's the science, the small, often really expensive experiments to figure out how to do this stuff. Then you have ecological restoration. That's the actual practice of doing it on a large scale. They say criticizing the cost of the practice based on the cost of the science, well, that's like judging the cost of building every car on the road by the cost of the very first prototype. And this really reframes the whole conversation. Maybe we've been asking the wrong question all along. It's not, is this too expensive to do? The real question is, what is the cost of doing nothing? I mean, when you think about the billions of dollars that healthy reefs provide through fishing, tourism, protecting our coastlines, suddenly the cost of inaction looks absolutely massive. Okay, so we've waded through the theory, the myths, the big debates. But what happens when people get it right? When they avoid those mental traps and really work with the reef's own rules? Can this stuff actually succeed out in the real world? The answer is a big, resounding yes. And we've got this amazing case study from Indonesia that shows exactly how. We're talking about a team working on a reef that was just completely obliterated. It was basically nothing but a field of broken coral rubble. So get this, they started at one spot, Site A, in 2018. The seafloor was almost all rubble. But in just 3 years, the coral cover there was already matching healthy reefs nearby. So they did it again at another spot, Site B. And by 2025, both of these restored areas were thriving. They looked just like the natural healthy reefs. I mean, the numbers here are just incredible. Site A went from 1% coral cover to 28% in 7 years. The healthy natural reef next door, it's at 30%. This is not some temporary garden. This is a real functioning ecosystem coming back from the dead. And what's really cool is how it recovered. It followed this classic S-shaped curve. It started off slow, then it took off like a rocket, and then it started to level off as it hit the reef's natural limit, what ecologists call its carrying capacity. It shows the goal was never some fake 100% coral-covered fantasy. The goal was to help the reef get back to its own natural, healthy balance. They weren't trying to control nature, they were giving it a helping hand. So let's be really clear here. Restoration is not a magic bullet. It's not going to single-handedly save all coral reefs from climate change. We absolutely have to tackle the root cause, our warming oceans. But in the meantime, millions of people depend on these ecosystems right now. And as we've just seen, when it's done right, when it's done thoughtfully, restoration can literally bring a reef back from the brink. It helps preserve genetic diversity, it supports local economies, and it buys these incredible underwater worlds precious, precious time. So the real question we're left with is, in a world that's losing these vital places so fast, is this really a tool we can afford to just leave sitting in the toolbox?